The beam from my flashlight cut through the darkness, catching something that made my stomach drop. I've been a detective in Goochland County for 12 years, seen plenty that kept me up at night. But this was different. The forest floor told a story I didn't want to read. Leaves scattered in violent patterns. Drag marks leading deeper into the woods. And blood, more than I'd expected, darker than it looked in training photos. My partner, Officer Marcus Webb, stood frozen at the trail entrance, radio pressed to his ear. His face had gone pale in the cruiser's headlights. Behind us, the volunteer search team waited, their voices dropping to whispers as they realized what we'd found. Detective Holloway, Marcus called out, his voice cracking slightly. Dispatch confirmed the ID. Bethany Crawford, 22 years old. Lives lived about 3 miles from here. 22. The number hit me like a physical weight. I had a daughter that age, finishing college in Richmond. This girl should have been doing the same, making plans, staying up too late, worrying about ordinary things. She was walking her dogs, someone said from behind us. I didn't turn to see who, just walking her dogs like always. The sentence hung there, unfinished, because none of us knew how to complete it. How do you explain something that shouldn't be possible? I crouched near the trail marker, letting my eyes adjust to what the flashlight revealed. 2 leashes, still clipped together at the handle, lay tangled in the underbrush. The fabric showed teeth marks, deep, aggressive tears that spoke of panic and chaos. Beside them, a phone with a cracked screen, face down in the dirt. The air smelled like wet earth and something metallic. Pine needles crunched under my boots as I moved carefully, treating every step as potential evidence. This was someone's daughter, someone's friend. Every detail mattered now. Marcus had composed himself, was already photographing the scene with the department-issued camera. The flash created harsh shadows between the trees, making everything look more sinister than it already was. Footprints here, he said, pointing. Hers, I think. And paw prints. Big ones. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. The forest felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Normally you'd hear owls, rustling leaves, the distant sound of the highway. Tonight, nothing. Just our radios crackling occasionally and the sound of my own pulse in my ears. Behind us, someone was crying softly. One of the volunteers who'd been searching since midnight, probably. It was almost 2 in the morning now. We'd hoped to find Bethany lost, maybe with a sprained ankle, embarrassed but alive. 3 days earlier, Goochland was just another small Virginia town where nothing much happened. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and everyone knew the sheriff by his first name. We had our problems, petty theft, domestic disputes, the occasional DUI, but not this. Never this. I'd driven past Bethany Crawford dozens of times without knowing her name. You know how it is in small towns. You recognize faces, wave at people, but don't always connect the dots. She was the young woman with the 2 pit bulls, always on the trails early morning or just before sunset. I'd seen her at the coffee shop on Main Street, laptop open, earbuds in, studying something. My partner Marcus knew her better. His daughter played softball with Bethany back in high school. She was always good with animals, he'd told me that first night. Volunteered at the shelter. Those dogs were her whole world. The town had a rhythm, a predictability that everyone depended on. Farmers market on Saturdays. Church bells on Sunday mornings. High school football under the Friday night lights. Bethany's evening walks with Atlas and Luna fit into that rhythm perfectly. Routine felt safe here. It felt like armor against the chaos you saw on the news happening in other places. Bethany's apartment sat above the old hardware store on Market Street. I stood there the next morning, waiting for her roommate to let us in. The sun was barely up, casting long shadows across the quiet street. A wreath hung on the door, sunflowers and lavender, handmade by the look of it. Her roommate, Kira Sutton, opened the door with red-rimmed eyes. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt and hadn't slept. That much was obvious. I keep thinking she's going to walk through that door, Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. Inside, the apartment told the story of a normal life interrupted. Hiking boots sat by the door, mud still caked on the soles. A dog bed in the corner, toys scattered around it. The kitchen counter had a grocery list in Bethany's handwriting. Dog food, Yogurt, trail mix, batteries. Things she'd never buy now. She left around 7:30, Kira explained, twisting her hands together. Same as always. Thursday was her long loop night. About 90 minutes through Morrison Woods. She always texted when she got back to the parking lot. The refrigerator was covered with photos. Bethany, smiling on a mountaintop. Bethany with 2 pit bull puppies. Bethany in her cap and gown, surrounded by family. Every image showed someone who loved being alive, who had plans, who thought tomorrow was guaranteed. Atlas and Luna weren't just pets. They were Bethany's project, her pride. She'd adopted them as puppies from the county shelter when she was 20, bottle-fed them when they were sick, trained them with the kind of patience most people don't have. I learned this from her parents, who sat in my office that morning, holding each other's hands so tight their knuckles had gone white. Thomas and Patricia Crawford. Good people trying to understand something that made no sense. She raised them from 8 weeks old, Patricia said, her voice mechanical, like she was reading from a script. Took them to obedience classes. Socialized them. She did everything right. Thomas stared at his hands. Everyone in town knew those dogs. Neighbors would stop and pet them. Kids played with them at the park. They were gentle. They were. He couldn't finish. What do you say when the thing that was supposed to be safe becomes the thing that destroys everything? I had a file open in front of me, background we'd pulled together overnight. Atlas was a blue-nosed pit bull, 70 pounds. Luna was slightly smaller, 65 pounds. Both fixed, both up to date on shots, both registered with the county. On paper, they were model dogs, the kind that made people reconsider breed stereotypes. They were always so calm, Patricia whispered, repeating what everyone had said. Morrison Woods Trail stretched 3 miles through dense forest on the edge of town. It was popular with locals, dog walkers, joggers, birdwatchers. The county had installed the trail 10 years back, trying to boost outdoor recreation. Wooden markers every quarter mile. A parking lot that fit maybe 15 cars. A warning sign about wildlife and tick season. I walked it that afternoon with Marcus, trying to see what Bethany would have seen. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating patterns on the path. Birds called to each other. A creek ran parallel to the trail about halfway in, the sound of water almost musical. Cell service drops out here, Marcus said, checking his phone. We were roughly a mile in. See? 1 bar. Then nothing. It was peaceful in a way that felt deceptive now. The kind of place where you'd let your guard down, where you'd feel invulnerable because you'd walked this path 50 times before. Familiarity breeds a kind of blindness. We stopped seeing potential danger in the things we do every day. The trail curved, following the natural contours of the land. Tree roots broke through the dirt path in places. The forest floor was thick with last autumn's leaves, now brown and decomposing. Easy to lose your footing if you weren't careful. She knew this place, I said aloud. Bethany's phone had been recovered, and our tech guy managed to pull the last messages from it. The final text went to her friend, Amanda Price, at 8:47 p.m. Thursday night. Almost done. Same loop as always. Need coffee after you in? Amanda had responded at 8:49. Yes. Meet at Java House at 9:30. Bethany had started typing a response. 3 dots, the message showing as undelivered. Whatever happened in those minutes between 8:47 and when she failed to finish that text. Amanda sat across from me in the interview room, tissues balled up in her fists. I waited at the coffee shop until 10, she said. Kept texting her. Thought maybe she'd forgotten or her battery died. It wasn't until almost 11 that I got worried and called Kira. Did Bethany mention anything unusual that day? I asked. Anything with the dogs? Anyone following her? Amanda shook her head. She was normal. Excited about this job interview she had coming up. Annoyed about some research paper. Normal 22-year-old stuff. The dogs were fine. She posted a photo of them that morning on Instagram. They were in the yard, just lying in the sun. That timestamp, 8:47 p.m., became a marker. A countdown to something none of us understood yet. Somewhere between that text and when Kira called us at 12:15 a.m., Bethany Crawford's ordinary evening had become her last. Kira had called us first at 12:15 a.m., voice tight with control panic. It's not like her. She always texts. She always comes home. I'd taken the call myself, was still at the station finishing paperwork on an unrelated case. How long has she been gone? She left at 7:30. It's a 90-minute walk, maybe 2 hours if she's going slow. She should have been home by 9:30, 10 at the latest. Standard procedure in missing persons cases is to wait, especially with adults. Most people turn up. They lose track of time. Their phone dies. They run into a friend. But something in Kira's voice made me pay attention. Did you try calling her? Straight to voicemail. I even drove to the trailhead. Her car's still there. Doors locked. I walked down the trail calling for her, but it's too dark. I couldn't see anything. By 12:45 a.m., we had units at Morrison Woods. By 1:15 a.m., we'd organized a search team. Volunteers showed up without being asked. That's how small towns work. Everyone knew Bethany or knew someone who knew her. The night was cold, temperature dropping into the 40s. If she was injured out there, hypothermia became a real concern. Marcus and I led separate teams down different sections of the trail. Flashlights swept through the darkness. People called her name until their voices went hoarse. At 1:47 a.m., a volunteer named Kyle Burton radioed in. He was a local teacher, had 3 kids, coached Little League. His voice shook as he spoke. Detective Holloway, you need to come to Marker 7, east side of the trail, maybe 20 yards into the woods. What did you find? Static. Then, just come. Please. Marcus and I moved fast, our flashlights bobbing through the darkness. Other searchers followed, sensing something had changed. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches catching at our clothes. Kyle stood by a massive oak tree, his flashlight pointed at the ground. He looked sick, wouldn't meet our eyes. I almost walked past it, he said. I heard something. Whimpering. That's what made me look. I moved past him, letting my light sweep the area. At first, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The human brain has a way of protecting itself, of refusing to accept certain realities. But then the pieces assembled themselves into understanding, and I had to grip the tree trunk to steady myself. It wasn't a scream we'd heard, not a struggle, just wrongness, the kind that makes your body recognize danger before your mind catches up. Kyle had found Bethany, or what remained of her. I'd seen death before, car accidents, heart attacks, even a hunting incident once. But this was different. This required my brain to work differently, to document instead of react, to be a detective instead of a human being who wanted to turn away. Marcus stood beside me, breathing hard through his mouth. The other searchers stayed back, thank God. This wasn't something they needed to see. This wasn't something anyone needed to see. Get crime scene tape, I managed. Wide perimeter. And call the medical examiner. Tell him. I paused. Tell him to prepare for something unusual. The dogs were there. 20 feet from Bethany's body. Luna lay motionless, a bullet wound in her chest. Alice was 10 feet beyond that, also shot. Later, we determined that a nearby resident had heard the attack, grabbed his hunting rifle, and done what he thought necessary to stop it. He'd saved no one, but he'd prevented us from having 2 dangerous animals loose in the woods. The scene told a story our forensic team would spend days confirming. The attack had been sudden and overwhelming. Bethany had tried to control them. The leashes showed that. She tried to run. The trail of evidence proved that. But 2 powerful dogs, both attacking at once, against a woman who weighed maybe 130 pounds? The outcome had never been in doubt. I've never seen anything like this, Marcus whispered. I regretted that he'd said aloud. Some thoughts should stay inside. By dawn, the medical examiner's van was parked at the trailhead. News vans from Richmond had somehow already arrived. Word travels fast in small towns, and this kind of tragedy travels faster. The story was too unusual, too shocking to contain. The county issued a statement by 9 a.m. Bethany Crawford, 22 of Goochland, died in a tragic accident involving her own dogs during a routine walk at Morrison Woods Trail. The investigation is ongoing. Our thoughts are with her family. Tragic accident. Those words felt too small, too neat for what had happened. But what else could we call it? There was no criminal to arrest, no villain to blame. Just a young woman and two dogs, and something had gone catastrophically wrong. The town exhaled collectively, then immediately felt guilty for that relief. It wasn't a serial killer. It wasn't random violence. It was a freak accident, horrible but contained. That's what people told themselves. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the official explanation didn't fit. The speed of it, maybe the way we'd wrapped it up with a neat bow when the crime scene had been anything but neat. Detective work is about asking questions others don't want to hear, and I had plenty of questions. Why had both dogs attacked simultaneously? Where was the trigger? And why hadn't anyone seen warning signs in animals that had lived peacefully in town for 2 years? I spent the next 3 days reviewing every piece of documentation we had on Atlas and Luna. Animal control records, vet visits, registration paperwork, training certificates. Everything pointed to well-cared-for, socialized animals. But then I found something buried in the county system, a note from 18 months ago. A neighbor had called about barking. Not unusual, dogs bark. But the responding officer, a young guy named Tim Wallace, had added a comment. Owner stated dogs became aggressive during feeding time. Advised to feed separately. No action required. I called Tim into my office. He was maybe 25, eager, the kind of officer who'd remember details. You went to Bethany Crawford's apartment in November of last year, I said. Tell me about that call. He thought for a moment. Noise complaint, right? Yeah, I remember. Nice girl, apologetic about the barking. She explained that the dogs got territorial around food, so she'd started feeding them in separate rooms. Seemed like she had it handled. Did you file a formal report? It was just a warning call. I made a note in the system. Should I have done more? I shook my head. He'd followed protocol. That was the problem. Protocol had assumed everything was fine. Did the dogs seem aggressive when you were there? They were behind a closed door. I heard them barking, but I didn't actually see them. Another note surfaced from 6 months ago. A woman at the dog park reported that Luna had snapped at a smaller dog. When questioned, Bethany had apologized profusely, said Luna was having an off day, and left immediately. No formal report. I met with Dr. Carla Henderson, an animal behaviorist from the University of Virginia. She drove down to review the evidence, examine photographs of the scene, and help me understand what might have triggered the attack. We sat in a conference room. Crime scene photos spread across the table. She studied them with clinical detachment, making notes. What people don't understand, she said finally, is that aggression isn't binary. Dogs don't wake up one day and suddenly become dangerous. It's cumulative. Small triggers, little incidents that get dismissed as one-off events. Like food aggression? Exactly. Or leash reactivity. Resource guarding. These things can escalate, especially in dogs with strong prey drives. And pit bulls, despite what people want to believe, were bred for certain traits. That doesn't make them inherently dangerous, but it does mean they require experience handling. Bethany seemed experienced, I said. She'd raised them from puppies. Experience and expertise aren't the same thing. Dr. Henderson pulled out a folder. I reviewed the training records you sent me. Basic obedience classes. Good start, but nothing advanced. No aggression management. No specialized training for powerful breeds. She pointed to one of the photos. See this? The way the leashes are tangled? My guess is one dog reacted to something, a sound, a smell, maybe a wild animal they detected. The other dog felt the tension through the leash and reacted too. It's called trigger stacking. Individual stressors that pile up until something snaps. So, this was preventable. She met my eyes. Most tragedies are. I requested full animal control records for the past 3 years. What I found was a pattern. Not with Atlas and Luna specifically, but with the system itself. Reports filed, but not followed up. Warnings given, but not tracked. A database that collected information without connecting the dots. In those 3 years, there have been 47 reports of dog aggression in Goochland County. 47 incidents ranging from minor nips to serious bites. Only 12 had resulted in formal investigations. Only 3 had led to any kind of intervention. I sat down with our animal control supervisor, an older man named Walter Hughes who'd held the position for 20 years. He looked tired, like he knew this conversation was coming. "We're understaffed," he said before I could ask my first question. "I've got 3 officers covering the entire county. We prioritize based on severity. If nobody's seriously hurt and the owner seems responsible, we file a report and move on." "What about follow-ups?" "Detective, we barely have time for initial responses. Follow-ups are for cases where we think there's imminent danger." "How do you determine imminent danger?" He didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, the system relied on assumptions. Responsible owner plus no serious injuries equaled low priority. It worked until it didn't, and when it didn't work, people died. I thought about Bethany's neighbor who'd reported barking. Thought about the woman at the dog park. They'd done what they were supposed to do, reported concerns. The system had received the information and filed it away, believing tomorrow would look like yesterday. The experts I consulted all said versions of the same uncomfortable thing. Warning signs don't announce themselves. They whisper. They show up as small inconveniences, minor adjustments, isolated incidents that seem manageable in the moment. A dog that guards food aggressively. A leash that gets pulled too hard during walks. Growls dismissed as excitement or play. Each incident, viewed alone, feels explainable. It's only in hindsight, when you line them all up, that the pattern becomes obvious. Dr. Henderson had given me a checklist. If an owner notices 3 or more of these behaviors, she'd said, they should seek professional help immediately. The list included food aggression, leash reactivity, territorial behavior, same-sex aggression, prey drive behaviors, possessive growling, resistance to commands in high-stress situations. I'd asked Kira to go through the list. She checked off 5 items. But Bethany was working on all of them, Kira insisted. She'd changed her training methods. She was being more careful. That was the tragedy of it. Bethany had recognized the problems. She'd been trying to fix them. She just hadn't realized how serious they were, or how quickly things could deteriorate. She thought she had time to course correct. Most people do, until suddenly they don't. Prevention isn't sexy, one expert told me over the phone. It's boring. It's resource intensive. It requires intervening in situations that look fine right up until they're catastrophic. Thomas and Patricia Crawford came to see me again on the 6th day. They looked like they'd aged a decade since I'd first met them. Grief does that. Collapses time, steals sleep, rewrites your face. "We need answers," Thomas said. "Real answers. Not tragic accident," in a press release. "What happened to our daughter?" I've been dreading this conversation. What truth did they want? The clinical version, that their daughter's dogs had attacked her due to escalating behavioral issues? The systemic version, that multiple warning signs have been documented but not acted upon? Or the human version, that Bethany had loved those animals and never imagined they could hurt her? I think Bethany was doing everything she thought was right. I began carefully. She loved Atlas and Luna. She trained them. But there were warning signs, small things that should have been taken more seriously. By who? Patricia's voice was sharp. By Bethany? By us? By someone at Animal Control? By everyone. I admitted this wasn't one person's failure. It was systemic. We had information that could have led to intervention, but it fell through cracks in a system designed for efficiency, not thoroughness. Thomas leaned forward. "So you're saying if someone had paid closer attention, connected the dots, our daughter would still be alive?" The honest answer was yes. The kind answer was different. I'm saying there were missed opportunities. But I'm also saying Bethany couldn't have known how much danger she was in. Nobody did. They left my office without the comfort they'd come looking for. Some truths create more pain than they resolve. The town split immediately into camps. Online forums exploded with debates that turned vicious. The comment sections under news articles became battlegrounds where strangers argued about things they didn't understand. One side defended the dogs, blamed Bethany, said she must have provoked them somehow, that responsible owners don't get attacked. These people posted articles about pit bulls being nanny dogs, cited statistics, accused anyone who questioned the breed of being prejudiced. The other side wanted all pit bulls banned, called them inherently dangerous, shared horror stories about other attacks. Some even suggested that Bethany's death was proof that certain breeds shouldn't exist. Almost nobody talked about the third option, the uncomfortable middle ground where complexity lives. Where dogs are individuals, where breeding matters but isn't destiny, where responsible ownership requires more than love and good intentions, where systems fail people by pretending simple answers exist to complicated questions. I watched the debates spiral, saw people attacking Bethany's memory, her family, each other, saw how grief and fear can make humans cruel. The tragedy had become a political football, something people use to confirm their existing beliefs rather than examine uncomfortable truths. Marcus summed it up one night over coffee. Everyone wants a villain they can point at. When the villain is diffused responsibility and systemic failure, nobody knows what to do with that. 3 weeks after Bethany's death, I met quietly with Walter Hughes from Animal Control. No press, no official channels. Just two people who understood that something needed to change. "How many reports do you think we miss?" I asked. He pulled out a laptop, opened a spreadsheet. "Honestly, we probably catch 60% of serious concerns. Maybe less. People call, we respond, we assess. But assessment is subjective. What looks concerning to one officer might look fine to another. And we don't have resources for behavioral evaluations or mandatory follow-ups. What would you need to fix that?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Money mostly. More officers. A dedicated animal behaviorist on staff. A better database that flags patterns instead of just storing data. Mandatory intervention protocols when certain criteria are met. Public education about warning signs. How much money? More than the county has. The budget committee told me last year that animal control isn't a priority. They fund us enough to handle rabies and roadkill. Everything else is volunteer work dressed up as a job. He showed me the spreadsheet. Cases color-coded by severity. Red for immediate danger, yellow for concerns, green for resolved. The screen was a sea of yellow, concerns acknowledged but not addressed, potential problems that would probably be fine but might not be. Nobody thought Bethany's case would end like this. Walter said quietly, "If we'd known, of course we would have intervened. But we didn't know. And with our resources stretched this thin, we can't know. We just cross our fingers and hope." I wrote my final report 3 months after Bethany's death. 27 pages detailing what happened, why it happened, and how similar tragedies might be prevented. The conclusion was clear but uncomfortable. This wasn't sudden. It was cumulative. Small decisions that seemed reasonable in isolation. A report filed without follow-up. A warning given without verification. Training classes checked off a list without assessing their adequacy. An owner who loved her dogs but lacked expertise in managing escalating aggression. A system prioritizing efficiency over safety. Each decision, each delay, each assumption, harmless on its own. Together, they built a path that led directly to Morrison Woods Trail on a Thursday evening in March. I included recommendations. Increased funding for animal control, mandatory behavioral assessments for dogs with documented aggression issues, public education campaigns, stricter protocols for follow-up investigations, and a database system capable of pattern recognition. The county manager thanked me for the thorough report, said they'd take my recommendations under advisement. I knew what that meant. The report would sit in a file cabinet until the next tragedy made it relevant again. Marcus read it and shook his head. "You think anything will change?" "Probably not," I admitted. "Not until it happens again. Maybe not even then." That's dark, Holloway. That's realistic. Change requires resources, political will, and public pressure. Right now, everyone's moved on to the next crisis. Town halls filled the next month, though. Citizens demanded action. The Crawford family showed up to every meeting, became advocates for the changes I'd recommended. They couldn't save their daughter, but maybe they could save someone else's. The county commission approved some changes. A dedicated phone line for reporting aggressive animals. 2 new animal control officers. A review of all existing cases with documented concerns. It wasn't everything I'd recommended, but it was something. New protocols were written. When officers responded to complaints now, they had to file detailed reports including behavioral observations and owner assessments. 3 documented incidents triggered an automatic follow-up investigation. 5 incidents required a mandatory behavioral evaluation by a licensed professional. The local newspaper ran a series on responsible dog ownership. The library hosted seminars on recognizing warning signs. The shelter started requiring potential adopters of powerful breeds to take preparedness classes before taking dogs home. Patricia Crawford spoke at one of these seminars. I sat in the back, watching her show photos of Bethany with Atlas and Luna as puppies. "My daughter loved these dogs," she said, her voice steady. But love wasn't enough. Education, intervention, support, these things could have saved her life. The crowd applauded. Some people cried. But I wondered how many of them would actually change their behavior, would recognize their own assumptions about their own pets, would act on small warning signs before they became catastrophes. The thing about accountability in cases like this is that it doesn't satisfy anyone. There was no criminal trial. No one went to jail. The dogs were dead. Bethany was dead. The system acknowledged failures in carefully worded statements that admitted problems without accepting liability. Walter Hughes retired early, though he'd done nothing criminally wrong. The responding officer who'd noted the food aggression but filed no formal report transferred to a different county. The woman who'd reported Luna's snapping at the dog park told a reporter she felt guilty, like she should have pushed harder for action. Everyone involved carried some responsibility, but it was diffused so widely it almost disappeared. That's how systemic failure works. It distributes blame so thoroughly that no one person can be held accountable, and therefore no one really is. The Crawford family filed no lawsuits. What would be the point? Thomas asked me one afternoon. Who would we sue? The dogs are dead. Animal control followed their protocols. Bethany made choices that seemed reasonable to her. There's no villain here. He was right, but that didn't make it easier. In some ways, having a clear perpetrator would have been simpler. Someone to direct anger toward, a trial to attend, a sentence to provide some sense of justice. Instead, there was just this diffuse sense of wrongness, of a preventable death that hadn't been prevented, of a system that had failed without technically failing, of responsibility acknowledged, but never assigned. I walked Morrison Woods Trail alone 4 months after finding Bethany's body. It was mid-July, hot and humid, the forest thick with green leaves and the sound of insects. The wooden trail markers had been repainted. Someone had left flowers at marker 7, though they'd wilted in the heat. The trail looked ordinary, peaceful even. Families walked past me, couples holding hands, people walking dogs without any visible concern. Life had returned to normal, or what passes for normal after tragedy. That's what unsettled me most, how ordinary it looked. There was no monument, no permanent marker indicating that something terrible had happened here. In a few more years, only those who remembered would know. Everyone else would just see another hiking trail. I thought about Bethany often, wondered what her last moments had been like, whether she'd had time to understand what was happening, or if the attack had been too sudden, too overwhelming for conscious thought. I hope for the latter. Some knowledge should die with you. The case stayed with me in ways others hadn't. Maybe because of her age, or because the system failure felt so preventable, or because I knew we'd learn nothing that would stick. The county had made changes, sure, but budget pressures would eventually erode them. Attention would drift. The protocols we'd established would become suggestions, then afterthoughts. Marcus asked me once why I couldn't let it go. I didn't have a good answer then. But standing there on that trail, watching ordinary people doing ordinary things in the place where extraordinary horror had unfolded, I understood. Because forgetting felt like betrayal. Because Bethany Crawford deserved better than becoming a cautionary tale people scrolled past. The Crawford house stayed exactly as Bethany had left it. Her bedroom untouched, her clothes still in the closet, her desk still scattered with textbooks from the semester she'd never finish. Patricia told me they couldn't bring themselves to change anything yet. Some days I forget, she said when I visited 6 months after the funeral. I hear a door close and think it's her coming home. Then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again. The sounds had changed. No more paws clicking on hardwood floors. No more barking when someone knocked. No more of the chaotic energy that dogs bring to a house. Just silence the kind that feels permanent. Thomas had thrown himself into advocacy work, pushing for legislation that would require behavioral evaluations for dogs involved in aggressive incidents. Bethany's Law, they were calling it. It had a chance of passing, though the version moving through committees had been watered down from what he'd originally proposed. They say it's too expensive, he told me bitterly. Too burdensome on animal control. Too complicated to enforce. All the same arguments that kept the old system in place. The system that failed our daughter. I had no comfort to offer. He was right. Change happened slowly, if at all, and usually only after multiple tragedies forced action. Bethany's death might not be enough on its own. It might take another victim, another family's grief before real change occurred. We sat in their living room, surrounded by photos of a smiling young woman who would never age beyond 22, and acknowledged the unfairness of it all. The official report on Bethany Crawford's death ran 47 pages. County commissioners received copies. So did state legislators, animal welfare organizations, and media outlets. Most people never read past the executive summary. The word preventable appeared once, buried on page 34, in a paragraph discussing systemic improvements. It wasn't highlighted or emphasized, just a quiet acknowledgement that with different decisions, different resources, different priorities, Bethany might still be alive. The report made recommendations without demanding action, suggested improvements without assigning blame, acknowledged failures without naming the people who'd failed. It was in many ways a perfect example of how institutions protect themselves while appearing to embrace accountability. I read it and thought about all the things it didn't say. About Walter Hughes working with insufficient resources and impossible expectations. About the neighbor who'd called about barking, but didn't push when told everything was fine. About Officer Wallace who'd followed protocol and still felt guilty. About Bethany herself, who'd loved her dogs and never imagined they could hurt her. The report reduced complexity to bullet points, tragedy to policy recommendations, a life to case number 2024 to 0847. That's what bureaucracy does. Transforms human stories into administrative language that's easier to file away and forget. Justice might have been the wrong word for what we were all seeking. Maybe acknowledgement was closer. An admission that Bethany Crawford's death meant something, taught us something, changed something. But even that felt elusive. The world moved on. It always does. 2 years later, I still drive past Morrison Woods Trail regularly. There's a small plaque now near the parking lot, installed by the Crawford family, in memory of Bethany Crawford. May we learn to recognize danger before it becomes tragedy. The sentiment is beautiful. The reality is harder, because recognizing danger requires resources, attention, willingness to intervene in situations that seem fine. It requires accepting that the familiar can become deadly, that routine doesn't equal safety, that love isn't enough to prevent catastrophe. Bethany trusted what felt familiar. She'd walked that trail dozens of times with Atlas and Luna. They were her companions, her responsibility, her family. She couldn't imagine they'd turn on her, because imagination requires us to believe in possibilities we've never experienced. The system trusted that tomorrow would look like yesterday. That reported concerns didn't require urgent action because they hadn't led to tragedy yet. That stretched-thin resources were adequate because they'd been adequate before. That protocols designed for efficiency would somehow also ensure safety. And somewhere between those assumptions, Bethany's and the system's, a young woman never made it home from a routine walk in familiar woods. I think about her every time I see someone walking their dog. Wonder if they know the warning signs. Wonder if they'd recognize escalating aggression. Wonder if they think tragedy is something that happens to other people, in other places, to people who weren't as careful or loving or responsible as they are. The truth Bethany's death taught me is simple and terrible. Sometimes being careful isn't enough. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes doing what seems right still leads to disaster. And sometimes the only way to prevent tragedy is to recognize that familiarity itself can be dangerous, that the ordinary can hide the catastrophic, and that assumptions kill. I wish someone had told Bethany that before it was too late. I wish the system had been built to protect her instead of just document her death. I wish a lot of things that wishing can't change. But maybe someone reading this will recognize their own warning signs. Maybe someone will push harder when told everything's fine. Maybe someone will survive because Bethany Crawford didn't. That's the only justice I can imagine now, that her death prevents another, that the lesson learned in Morrison Woods spreads far enough to save someone else. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. But it's all we have. Bethany Crawford didn't die because no one cared. She died because the warning signs were quiet, the systems were slow, and familiarity made danger invisible. Her story is a reminder that tragedy doesn't always come from evil intent. It often grows out of ignored whispers and mischances to act. If this story stayed with you, don't let it end here. Share it so others can recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Like this video to help it reach people who need to hear it. And subscribe for more true crime stories that don't just recount what happened, but ask why it happened and how it could have been prevented. Because remembering Bethany isn't enough. Learning from her story might save someone else.